Honestly, if I ever disappeared and somebody discovered and reviewed my found footage, it's just going to be a bunch of cat videos. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. I'll leave a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But this is our Doctorate Level series, where we revisit a subgenre that we've already talked about, take a quick look at the 3 movies that we talked about in that video, and then we pick a 4th doctorate level. Something that's maybe a little more deeper cut or a little less mainstream than what we've talked about previously to add to the conversation. Today, the subgenre that we're revisiting is found footage. And when we talked about found footage previously, we had to note just how popular of a subgenre this is. Over the last 20 years or so, this has become a staple of horror. It's a very big, very popular subgenre, in part because of how cheap it is to make, how easy it is to make films like this, and to make them very effectively. We spent some time discussing that in the previous video about their popularity and the popularity being tied to their cheapness, but also about how because they're so cheap, they're also very ubiquitous and there's a lot of them out there, many of which are not great, which makes this to be a rather divisive subgenre. Some people really love it and some people really, really hate it, just by virtue of the style, the found footage style, which in case you didn't know, is the idea of you're watching video footage that somebody took in the movie, that the cameraman is a character in the movie, and you've discovered their footage after something horrible has happened to them usually. This conceit creates some narrative issues that all found footage movies have to tackle, namely things like why are these people still filming? How can they be filming for this long? Finding a satisfying ending. These are things that tend to be difficult things for found footage movies to accomplish well, and the best found footage movies manage to do it better, manage to do it more convincingly, because what you really want to do is kind of keep the verisimilitude, the illusion of this being a real event rather than a movie. That's the key to having a successful found footage movie. When it's done well, it's incredibly effective, and that's what we were talking about in the previous video, was movies that have managed to do it really, really well. And it's amazing to me how many fail to do this, how many of them don't succeed. You'd think it's very simple, very easy to pull this off, but evidently that's not the case. It's also worth noting that in the previous video, we distinguished between a found footage movie and a mockumentary being a faux documentary where, it's a documentary about something that's not a real documentary, about a fake event or a fake occurrence or incident or whatever, that maybe splices in some found footage stuff into it. And then found footage movies, which are oftentimes framed up as being part of a documentary, like a documentary that's presenting this found footage. The nuance is kind of blurry, to be honest with you, but we're going to be talking about movies in a little bit that are really kind of blurring that line, kind of really ride that line a little bit. So I wanted to mention it here, that we usually distinguish found footage from mockumentary by where the focus is. If the focus is on that actual found footage, we're going to call it a found footage movie. And if it's really focused more on that fake documentary format, then we're going to call it a mockumentary. These movies that we're talking about are considered found footage, at least by the Horror Movie Syllabus standards. And we talked about 3 really great examples, and we're going to go ahead and recap those for you right now. The first found footage movie that we previously discussed was The Blair Witch Project. And this is the notorious kind of granddaddy of found footage movies, because it's often credited as being the one that kicked off the found footage craze, the one that really solidified it as a viable option for filmmaking and something that audiences would really gravitate towards. And the key to its success, because it was incredibly successful financially, very cheap to make, made a ton of money, the key to that success was making people buy into it. They did a whole web campaign with websites and everything that made you really believe that this was found footage being presented to an audience of real kids that had gone missing in the woods. And if you bought into that, the movie was incredibly effective for you. And if you knew that it was a gimmick and you didn't buy into it, it tended to not be so effective. And that's what made the Blair Witch Project such a divisive film for people, is a lot of people didn't really buy into it. In the video, I told a story about when I had some friends come over to the house and watch it, and it's a pretty fun story. I go back in the video and watch that because it's a pretty good kick of a story. But it really is effective if you can be in the right mindset for it. If you really can buy into the honesty of it, the reality of it, or just at least kind of even suspend your disbelief to think about what would happen if it was really the case. It can be a very effective movie, and it's still one of my favorites. So it's very important, very noteworthy, and we had to discuss it on the syllabus. The next movie that we discussed was Paranormal Activity. And if the Blair Witch Project is often considered the one that kicks off the found footage craze, Paranormal Activity is pretty much the one that really did do so, because it's after Paranormal Activity where you see the glut of these found footage movies hit the horror market. And this one set off the craze for good reason, because it's an extremely well-made movie that's very effective, especially if you are afraid of ghosts. It does a lot of the same things that the Blair Witch Project did, but it doesn't rely on the gimmick. It doesn't try to fake you out in believing that it's real. I mean, the framework of the movie does, but the marketing and everything never tried to convince anybody that it was something that really happened, and yet it was still very successful. They were able to leverage having a bigger budget, having a little bit more accomplished filmmakers, using fixed cameras and things like that. It was really a way to take the Blair Witch Project concept to the next level, and it was very successful in doing so, to the tune of very big financial success, a huge franchise, and like I said, a ton of imitators, a ton of other movies that are trying to cash in on the craze. So this one wound up being very, very important. And while the sequels gave diminishing returns, we talked about that a little bit in the video, I still have a lot of love for the original. I still think it's very clever, very fun, giving some really fun performances, and I definitely think that's one that you have to see to really understand the found footage phenomenon. And the last movie that we talked about in the video was a movie called Creep. And Creep is something of a lesser known movie. It's a bit of a mumblecore movie with Mark Duplass as a star. And if you're familiar with his work, you know that he likes to do things where you kind of improv and only have semi-scripted type situations. And this is what Creep is doing. And it's what adds to the realism of it. The setup winds up being very believable because the dialogue, the exchange between the two people feels very natural, feels very unscripted, if you will. And it shows what you can do when you don't have much of a budget, but you have really quality talent both in front of and behind the camera, because Creep looks like a really good, slick movie that's not made for a lot of money. And it's not like a do-it-yourself movie. It's not a super micro-budget movie, but it is a lower-budget movie, and it winds up being as good in terms of quality and aesthetic as any studio-made movie. It's arguably better looking than Paranormal Activity, which had more money to work with. And as a result, it's become something of a cult favorite, and for good reason, because it's just, it lives up to its name. It's super creepy. And so if that's one you haven't seen, I definitely recommend you check it out. So those are the movies that we discussed in our previous found footage video, and now it's time to look at the new doctorate level selection for this subgenre. Our doctorate level selection for the found footage horror subgenre is Gonjiam, Haunted Asylum. Gonjiam came out in 2018 and is a South Korean film. It's a foreign film, and it is definitely continuing the trend of South Korean horror movies that are just cut above, exceptionally well-made and really fresh feeling or original feeling concept or take on things that are kind of well-worn tropes, really. But we're going to get into that a little bit more specifically because it's not as clear or as clean as you might expect from what I just said. But hold on to that. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a web-based ghost hunter series, one of those ghost hunter series that look for ghosts, and they've decided to explore this haunted asylum, this well-known, pretty infamous, scary asylum where bad things have happened and people have reported hearing ghosts and whatnot. They break in there, they set up their cameras, they are there to try to do a live stream to basically drive up views and drive up revenues, but of course the scary, spooky things happen, hijinks abound, and things go real crazy, real fast. But I won't say anything more so as to not spoil the movie for you. But Gonjiam Haunted Asylum is maybe not the most original of movies, and we're going to delve into that a little bit later in the video. But it's a setup that is fairly well-worn, fairly trite, if you really want to be honest about it. a bunch of people going to a scary location. It's really honestly kind of what the Blair Witch Project was, except that they substitute the woods for a haunted asylum. But the whole thing about why this movie winds up resonating and why this winds up being noteworthy and why we've picked it as a doctorate level selection is because of how well made it is. And again, this is where I think the South Korean influence comes through, because those movies tend to be really quality, really well made, and they don't adhere to an American aesthetic in terms of look, pacing, lighting, acting, etc. They have their own flavor, at least I feel they do, and that's on display here to its benefit. We start off with the normal found footage trope of like the kind of mundane early footage of people getting to know each other, kind of setting up the story, setting up the relationships, and the central conceit of the movie, only to follow them into the scary stuff. But in this case, I find that to be less tiresome or yawn-inducing as it is in so many other found footage movies, and I think it's because I just really liked the cast. I found them, by and large, to be extremely affable, likable, charming people, even though the characters are kind of caricatures. They're basically thin characters like most found footage movies. They are just something about them. They're just charming. They have a likability, an innate likability to them that kind of makes me connect with them, even though there's not a whole lot to connect to. I'll credit the actors for this. I'll credit the casting director for casting the right people that were likable. Even though they don't always do the most likable things, I was still drawn to them. I was still interested in seeing what happened to them, which is important. It's important if you're going to want to get somebody to get into the story, to care about these characters. Another thing that they did that's really cool is they based this on a real haunted place. They didn't actually film that much of the movie, I think just exteriors and stuff, at the actual location. Ganjim is a real asylum that's closed down, that is purportedly haunted. There's lots of stories that come out of it. So all of that is based on real life lore. And that, I think, adds to that verisimilitude. That adds to that reality, that feeling of honesty or believability to the story. And I think that they leverage that exceptionally well. But the reason that this movie seems to resonate with people, and it does, it's got a cult following, is that it really takes off. Like, it's a pretty well-paced movie, but that final act really gets you. It goes up to 11. It really gets crazy, and the scares are very effective. Like, they have jump scares throughout, and a lot of them are kind of your standard found footage, haunted house, ghosty type scares. But when they started really ramping it up, they got some really crazy stuff going on here. Some really unsettling and disturbing imagery that hits for me, and I know it hits for a lot of people. Like the girl with the black eyes doing the little chattering, scatty thing. Oh my God, that's really creepy. That bona fide creeped me out, and it's hard to creep me out because I've seen a lot of these kind of movies, but that one actually creeped me out. And there's just some really cool stuff like that in this movie that feels earned too. The jump scares feel earned in this movie. They don't feel cheap. They don't feel lame, and they keep you on edge. They don't completely dissipate the tension that they've ratcheted up in the movie. And so that's why I think this movie winds up being so effective, where so many other found footage movies wind up falling short. I also like that they did a really good job of explaining the found footage motif and why people are still filming. By setting up this whole live stream event, it gives an excuse for why people are going to keep the cameras rolling. And they also set it up with these cameras that are attached to them so that you can see their reactions and also see what they're looking at without them, having to use their hands, which A, frees them up to be able to do things in the movie, but B, gives an excuse as to why they haven't dropped the camera, why we're getting the footage that we're getting. It's a great way to leverage technology to explain these plot holes that most found footage movies have. It was really effective to, again, keep you sucked in, keep you into believing the reality of this movie, even though it's not real. You've seen Blair Witch, all of this, but you still buy into it because it does a really good job of trying to make you buy in to the fact that this could really happen. And it's a very effective movie as a result. This is one that doesn't seem to have gotten any kind of mainstream love, although it was a huge hit in Korea, and it is a hit here in the US amongst horror fans. A lot of you horror hounds are going to know this one. You've probably seen it, and you can probably, I'm guessing you're with me on this, and it's really good, really effective. One of the better examples of found footage, and the only drawback to it really is that because it's subtitled and you're reading the subtitles, that does take you out of the experience a little bit. Like if you spoke Korean and did just hear the Korean, I think the performances are great, so I think you'd really get sucked in without the subtitles. The subtitles is a necessary evil if you want to know what's going on or what's being said, but honestly, I feel like you could watch this without the subtitles and you'd still follow what was going on, and it would still be extremely effective. So I highly recommend Ganjiam Haunted Asylum if you haven't seen it before, especially if you're a found footage fan. If you like that kind of movie, if you like ghost stories, haunted houses, things like that, this is the one for you. This is going to really hit. This is going to be a really, really fun ride. So I'm not going to tell you anything more than that other than go check it out. And then, of course, let me know what you think after you've seen it. So that's our doctorate level selection for found footage horror movies. But if you like these kind of movies, and I know there's a ton of you out there that do, and I'm one of you, I've got a good extra credit selection that we need to talk about. The extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Grave Encounters. Grave Encounters came out in 2011 and is directed by a team of directors called the Vicious Brothers, who I'm not super familiar with, but they did do the movie Spiral, not the Saw movie Spiral, but the other movie Spiral that we talked about here on the channel, which I thought was extremely good. But this one is a found footage movie, and so it's a little bit different and not playing into the same sensibilities. And as a result, has some fans and has some detractors, and we're going to get into all that in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a TV show of ghost hunters, people that go out there and try to find these ghosts on camera and do this whole, investigating thing. And they're exploring an abandoned asylum that is supposedly haunted, a psychiatric hospital that apparently had atrocities committed in it and is now haunted. And they go in there, lock themselves in, trying to find some scares, maybe try to entertain their audience. Only real things start happening, real spooks start happening, events that are unexplainable start happening, and of course the hijinks start to abound as they always tend to do. And the first thing you should be asking yourself is, wait a minute, didn't we just talk about this movie? Because yes, Ganjiam Haunted Asylum sounds exactly the same as Grave Encounters when you describe the plot, because it's basically the same movie in terms of plot. It's not a remake, but it has the same central premise, the same concept for both movies, and Grave Encounters did it first. But the reason why we picked Ganjiam as the doctorate level and Grave Encounters is here as the extra credit is because of, frankly, the quality of the movie. Everything that Ganjiam does so well, I feel, is missing from the Grave Encounters movie. The characters are very unlikable, and the actors, if I'm being honest, aren't really very stellar. They're not great here. Nobody's doing great work here. They're not horrendous. They're not bad, but they feel very theatrical. Their reactions to things feel very scripted. And even though they did do a little bit of improvising and ad-libbing and stuff like that, it feels very scripted. Their reactions feel scripted. They feel very big, very theatrical. They don't feel authentic or realistic. They feel like what you'd expect to see in a movie reaction. And it really, for me, takes me out of the movie quite a bit. It does the opposite of what Ganjiam did. It takes me out of it. Now, this one is the same premise as Ganjiam, but it's not using a real location like Ganjiam did. So you're also missing that aspect of it. And right off the bat, it's just feeling kind of forced. It's feeling like a standard found footage movie. We talked earlier about these found footage movies. They're kind of a dime a dozen that really just kind of, do this because it's cheap and easy to do. And this feels like one of those movies. It feels like they're trying to, just improve upon the Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity. In fact, I would say this movie is a kind of a mashup of those movies. The central premise feels very much like Blair Witch, but with Paranormal Activity thrown in. And those two movies had already come out, so that's their influence. It's very, very obvious. There's even some shots in this movie that are clearly influenced by those movies, that are clearly, I'll call it homages and being nice about it. They're homaging those movies. And that's fine. I'm a big fan of, hey, if you're going to steal from the best, I'm cool with that. That is not my problem with this movie. The fact that it's, kind of derivative of some other movies is not a big deal because that's horror in general. If I had that problem, I wouldn't like any horror movies, basically. What I just don't like is the execution. I feel like that they have a really cool premise. In fact, I know it's a cool premise because they use that same premise in Ganjiam, but they don't really nail the execution. They don't do what Ganjiam does and really explain why people are still filming or haven't dropped their camera. Like there's whole things where they're talking about losing camera battery, but they're still running their cameras. And they don't drop the cameras and do things like try to save people and stuff like that. It's hard. You have to really suspend your disbelief. Again, kind of common for all found footage movies, but Grave Encounters doesn't really do anything better than any other movie to try to solve that issue. They have these jump scares, and I feel like I feel like this is where they watched Blair Witch and said, you know what? There's not enough jump scares in Blair Witch. It's just all dread and there's no payoff. So we're going to give some payoff. And they do. And if you watch Blair Witch and you feel like, you know what? I need more jump scares. This movie doesn't do it for me. Maybe Grave Encounters is for you because they really do a good job of scattering in a lot of really, effective jump scares. They'll make you jump. For me, I don't love them because unlike Gonjiam, I don't feel like they're as earned. And I feel like the effects don't look as good. A lot of them feel very CGI-y, seeing ghosts and having their faces like all morph into something terrible and horrifying. Okay, but it doesn't really land for me, and it definitely doesn't land for me the way Gonjiam did. And I know that it seems like, oh, I'm just kind of bashing this one because it's not as good as Gonjiam, and yeah, I kind of am because Grave Encounters has this following, and that's cool. And yeah, I would maybe be one of them except that Gonjiam now exists. And I didn't see Grave Encounters when it came out. I didn't see it until years later. I did see it before Gonjiam, but it didn't do that much for me. And then Gonjiam, I saw it not that long after and was way better. And so for me, it's always suffered from that comparison. Even though Gonjiam is the second movie, it comes later. The original one for me doesn't measure up. It doesn't really hit for me. So I'm glad there's a cult following. I'm glad people enjoy it. They're getting something out of the scares and the jump scares and the story. I'm not one of them. I push the Gonjiam button for sure. But it's still worth mentioning this movie because of that cult following, because of the premise being really solid, a really cool idea, this kind of parody, if you will, of ghost hunter shows. And honestly, a lot of people describe this as a parody of the ghost hunter shows. I don't really see it that way. I don't really see this as a parody, but mileage may vary on that one. But I do think it's noteworthy enough because of its reputation, because of its impact on Gonjiam, if nothing else. And I know it was popular enough that it got a sequel. I haven't seen the sequel, but by all accounts, the sequel is not very good. So if even the fans of the original, the first movie, Grave Encounters, don't like the sequel, I don't even know that I'd spend my time on that one, frankly. But you let me know if you've seen it. Let me know if it's worth the time because I'm not inclined to watch the sequel, but if you guys say it's awesome, maybe I'll check it out. Who knows? I don't hate Grave Encounters. I just wish it was better. I wish that the actors were more likable. I think that would go a long way. If the actors were more likable or just a little bit more engaging. They don't even have to be likable, just like make me more invested in them and care about them a little bit more, then maybe I would have gotten sucked into this movie a little bit better. But as a result, it's not for me. It's not my favorite. I don't hate it, but it's worth a watch. But I know there's lots of people out there that love it. And if you're one of them, leave in the comments below what about this movie you love so the rest of us can understand the positive aspect of this one because I had to mention this one, but I'm not really super enthralled with it. So let us know its merits in the comments below. So that's going to do it for our recap of the found footage horror subgenre and along with our new doctorate level selection. If you like these kind of movies, these are movies to check out for sure. And obviously, if you have other suggestions, leave them in the comments below because, I do love this subgenre, even though so much of it is bad. When it's good, it's really, really good. So it's definitely something I like to check out. But now it's time to check out a horror trivia pursuit card. And I've got the card right here. As you guys know, I like to read a question here live on camera and try to answer it. And because we're talking about ghost movies today, let's do the monster category on the card. The question is this. What actor played Ash in 1992's Army of Darkness? Now, I don't like to be an elitist horror fan, but if you don't know the answer to this question and you call yourself a horror fan, I want you to stop the video right now, pause it, go watch Army of Darkness, and then come back and get educated because this is an icon. This is a horror icon we're talking about here. Ash is a horror icon character, and the actor that plays Ash is also a horror icon and just an icon in general, frankly. So I would imagine that most of you know this. And I'm just kind of talking a little bit to give some people a chance to think about it. But we're not going to talk too long because you really should know this one. And if you're not, you're going to just take a guess. But, I'll give you a slight hint that, Army of Darkness is part of the Evil Dead franchise. So perhaps that helps you if you don't know and you're trying to guess. That's my little clue to you. But again, most of you are going to know this. Most of you are going to know who this person is because they are a horror legend. I actually got a chance to bump into them at a convention once, and I literally bumped into them, just walked and just almost literally crashed into them. And unfortunately, they were being mobbed by people, so I couldn't talk or anything, even get posed for a picture because they were just getting mobbed. If I can find the picture I did take, I'll try to post it. But it's pretty fun. Anyways, I'm kind of digressing. We're prattling on longer than we need to. Lock in your answer. The answer I have, of course, is Bruce Campbell. Double check the card for some reason. Yeah, it's Bruce Campbell. We know that. We all knew this, right? We all knew Bruce Campbell. You all got this one right, right? And if you didn't get it right, what did you say? If you said Jane Levy, that's funny, and I want to know about it. But otherwise, you guys should have gotten that one right. But that's all we have for today. I hope you guys had a good time. I hope you stayed till the end, and I hope you have some good found footage suggestions for me and for everybody else, because this is a fun subgenre. When it's good, it's real good. So leave us the suggestions of the good ones down below. Until next week when we do something completely different, I'll just say, class dismissed.